there was some stupid thing on one of those stupid social networks recently, and they were like, something about vertical video or anamorphic or whatever, I don't know. And I know we've made jokes about this before, but I think that we've gotten far enough down the vertical video road that it's time for vertical anamorphic.
That's just the next logical step.
And I don't even mean like extra tall. I'm thinking like you're shooting 3x2, 4x3 on a 1.5 squeeze. That's basically 2-to-1. I mean, we're already shooting similar vertically anyway. I think it's time we turn those anamorphic sideways and get some like really weird, like the oval bokeh's the wrong way. Now it's like fat bokeh.
Yeah, it's like a funhouse mirror.
I'm just saying, I want to get some fat bokeh, and I want to get some weird streaks. And I think it's time. I think it's time for vertical anamorphic.
Yeah, it's the only time filming weird streaks is okay to do.
I mean, there's other times.
There are other times.
There's like football games. Sometimes like a weird streak might run across the field.
True. Maybe some sort of like paranormal type video.
Maybe, yeah, sure. Maybe there's like it's like a jet thing, and they're like doing smoke trails, and like it's just a little weird. I don't know. And maybe it's vertical anamorphic. You could shoot all those things in vertical anamorphic.
I think in order to do that, though, you're going to need to buy one of those nanomorph lenses. And we know that'll never happen.
Yeah, well, when it does, I'm going to start my vertical anamorphic.
You're only ever going to use it vertical?
Yep, and I'm gonna start a TikTok channel, and it's going to become a trend, and it's going to be like the hot new thing. Everyone's going to be like, how do you get that fat bokeh? Oh, you want fat bokeh? Let me show you the way.
Welcome back to the Camera Gear Podcast. I'm Daniel.
And I'm Lucas.
And we're here today to talk about the gear, software, and techniques we use to shoot photos and video. I don't know what to say about all that. It's just too much. Can't handle it.
I mean, you gotta like grow your capacity, Daniel. This is coming whether you like it or not. We're all living in a fat bokeh world, or we will be soon.
If you say so.
None of that skinny bokeh.
None of that skinny bokeh.
I like my bokeh to have a little bit of girth to it.
All right, we need to move on from that.
I know next to nothing about the Leica M11-P.
All right, that's perfect. I also know very little about it, but it has one very interesting feature, which is that somehow it authenticates images that you take with it. So
is it like it has that new Adobe file stuff built in that we talked about like a week or two ago?
I don't think it's that. I mean, they didn't really mention that. It just kind of sounds like its own thing, its own Leica magic. But
okay.
This is a new Leica camera, which super expensive and all that. But
yeah, sure. It's probably a rangefinder style. Probably looks real sleek. Probably shooting it in monochrome.
Yeah, but the special thing about this camera is that it puts like a fingerprint sort of thing on your pictures that's supposed to like authenticate that it came from a real Leica camera and not AI generated stuff. And I don't know. I just thought it was interesting. It's something that we've been talking about a little bit with this AI generated stuff and all that. And this is maybe one of the first cameras that's come out that seems like it's trying to address that.
I think what this is that C2PA authentication, which I believe is exactly what we were talking about last time.
Okay, so
which is it's the Adobe authenticator thing. And like I mentioned, they're going to do it. It's cool to see a camera finally come out with it of like, here's the first one. And I know that like Nikon and maybe Lumix, Nikon for sure, have already committed to putting this into their cameras. I'd be surprised if we didn't see this in every camera over the next 3 years. Yeah,
I'm still curious if it's really going to make a difference. I mean, it seems like it feels like you could fake all this stuff too. Like I don't understand how they're getting around that, but I mean, I guess it's just like any form of encryption where there's like a certified signature and all that, and so maybe it is actually secure. But
yeah, I've been thinking about that. As far as what if you took a screenshot of a picture and then faked the authentication on it, but maybe it's a matter of the devices that you're using to even create like create a screenshot are going to have some sort of, keyed way to authenticate or, mark it. And like, are all of our screenshots then going to be C2PA? Like, is that just going to be added into the operating system?
I don't know. I mean, because the way that sort of thing usually works is like you can sign something with a digital signature. So the way I'm familiar with it is like if you make a software application, you can sign that.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that something like that is signed is that you have a private key, like you as the creator have a private key that you don't give out. And so theoretically, I mean, unless that encryption is broken, then theoretically it would actually be like verifiably from that source or not. But I don't know.
It's supposed to carry through if you like shoot the photo and then it comes from the camera. It's like, this is your photo, and then you bring it in through Lightroom. Whenever you export from Lightroom, it's supposed to then retain the same key or hashing.
Right.
Whenever you export from Lightroom. I don't know if Lightroom is going to then have the ability to add a hash or a key to photos that you import that don't have C2PA. Not sure what that looks like. It's just kind of all very new, very 1.0. And I honestly haven't seen too much information on this apart from the announcements at that Adobe Summit thing that was like maybe a month ago.
I think that's what gets me is like, it's like, I can see how you could generate this signature and say like, this is definitely from a Leica M11-P. Like I get that. But what I don't get is how, if I have that picture, what stops me from like taking that and modifying it with AI? Like if I use Photoshop and do like the generative fill, or if I even just like use MS Paint and just drop a different thing on top. Like, I don't know. Like, I'm not sure how that fingerprint stays. Like maybe they're encoding the actual like content of the image into that encryption key somehow. I don't know. It's
on the c2pa.org website. There is an explainer and a specification. And this explainer is not aggressively long. I feel like you should read this and come back and tell me about it.
Okay. Maybe I should. Maybe I need to go do some more homework.
And
sounds exhausting.
It sure does. Yeah. Someone will explain it to us later.
Yeah. Well, pretty cool. I do think we're going to see some more cameras, and just thought it was interesting that it's already appearing. Like I kind of thought it would take longer before we saw it on a real camera.
Yeah, they must have been coordinating this ahead of time. I would expect that if they were talking to Leica, maybe other camera manufacturers have already been talking about it.
Yeah. I think you're probably right.
There was a new camera that came out today, and they did not mention this in that new camera.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And that new camera is a similar price point, I assume, to this Leica.
Almost certainly similar price point.
So you want to tell us what this is?
I think you should.
Fine. So Sony had this event, and they announced the event a week or so ago, or a week or two ago, and everybody was like, "Oh, what's this going to be?" And I don't really know if there were any rumors around what that.
A little bit. There was.
Were there some? Okay. Well, I didn't know what it was going to be because I don't follow Sony rumors. But anyway, it turns out this made a pretty big splash. So they announced the A9 III, and the big thing about this camera, besides the price, is that it's the first mirrorless full-frame global shutter camera.
I don't think you said that correctly, Daniel. Let me rephrase it. It's the first mirrorless full-frame global shutter camera.
That is a lot of sarcasm quotes.
I mean, the global sensor cameras have been out before. Full-frame global sensors have been out before. This is certainly not the first.
Yeah.
I think mirrorless is the key modifier here.
Yeah, it's like the first global sensor in a normal camera that you can hold in your hand that has that form factor, maybe.
Yep. It sure. Daniel, this is a pretty big freaking deal.
It really kind of is.
Like,
I mean, people have been interested in this kind of thing for a long time, and now there's actually a camera with it.
Just looking through the specs and the splash, and this has huge Sony energy.
Yes, it does.
As far as like, we make the sensors, we're gonna have the coolest, like most forward tech that you can put into a camera before anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
And it felt like maybe, I don't know, 5-6 years ago, and then before that, they were making huge leaps in front of people. But with the release of the A7R5 and the C cameras were kind of nothing, but like the A7R5 and the A7 IV and the A7S III, and it's like not really that impressive. And they didn't seem like they were that much better or that much cooler than what Nikon or Canon was doing.
Yeah, I mean, they did have the AI stuff, but in terms of just like pure image specs, they weren't really blowing anything away.
And this is that. This is just the most Sony thing that I've seen in
it really
years.
Yeah.
They didn't give the cameras out ahead of time either, which was very strange, not traditional Sony. They scheduled the event. They bring everybody to the event, didn't brief anyone beforehand. And then they brief them at the event and then give them a hands-on. So like everyone's scrambling to get information out.
Yeah, and there's no videos on it yet.
There are now. But the information has been very controlled. And the stuff that they're, providing, the press release and all these things, they're holding back certain information like dynamic range and being very careful with like how they're introducing and releasing this. And it makes me feel like they're holding back where the compromises are. Things like dynamic range or noise performance.
Yeah.
And are those going to be like okay, average, good, great? And it's like they want to control the messaging around this heavily. And I find that a little interesting.
Yeah, a little suspicious maybe. But
maybe suspicious.
I mean, honestly, even if there are compromises around those things, I think this is still a big step forward. And I mean, it makes me excited about what's to come in cameras.
Yeah. We're like talking around it. There's a lot to get into here.
Yeah.
I have like a few more questions just at the general Sony level before we make a deep dive into this A9 III.
Okay.
When did the A9 II come out?
That's a good question. As a professed not Sony expert, I don't know the answer to that.
2019.
Okay, so it's been 4 years.
That's reasonable. Okay. There's been two A9s, and before it was kind of, A7. Here's the mid tier, and I guess A9 was the photo-centric high tier.
Yeah,
as far as if you wanted the best photo camera, like maybe you were leaning towards the A9, and all the A7 stuff was more of like a hybrid.
Yeah.
Even though they do have the high resolution and the mid and
the R one also seemed really, the A7R always seemed really photo oriented. And then there's also the A1.
Right. So they released the A1, and there's only been one A1, and it's not barbecue sauce or steak sauce, I guess. It's a camera, and that seemed like that was the flagship. Like this is the best of the best of the best. And now they have this A9.
Yeah.
And I don't understand the order of the line. When I look at Nikon, they're like the best one is the highest number. So here's the Z9, and then the Z8, and then the Z7, and then the Z6. And as you go down, they get lesser in price and lesser in feature.
Yes.
And then if you add more numbers like Z50, it's also
like a lower tier.
Lower tier, right. Canon, opposite.
Yep.
R3, R5, R6. Like as they go up, they get lower tier.
Yeah.
R10, R1. What is Sony doing?
It's a great question.
You have the A7 series, and then on one side, the A9, that's a higher tier camera. And then on the A1, that's a higher tier camera.
I have to imagine that they didn't want to call it like the A11 or something because, then you're getting into those more numbers thing, and the more numbers ones are always worse. They didn't strategize well enough with their numbers. I think that's one question. And the other question is, why is this camera an A9 and not an A1?
I have the exact same question. Why is it not an A1 Mark II?
Yeah.
It seemed like the A1 was the feature camera of here's the highest specs. It was the first time we saw a stacked full frame sensor that could read out just as crazy fast as that camera can read out. And like here's like the next thing. This global sensor readout in a photo camera, unbelievable. Like we'll get into how crazy it is. I don't understand why that's on an A1. Is it a resolution thing? Is the A1 supposed to be for resolution and then the A9 is not supposed to be for resolution? Because I thought the A9 II was 40 megapixels or something. I'm going to look that up.
That's weird. Doesn't make much sense.
So you neither know how to interpret this. The A9 II was also 24 megapixels.
Yeah. So, I mean, maybe that's the difference because I assume the A1 is much higher, but that's a weird distinction for those.
I just don't understand what the A9 line is for. Is it for their action stuff? Is it for like sports photography, that sort of thing?
Well, this camera definitely seems like it's for stuff like sports and wildlife photography. So maybe. But again, like I thought the A1 was good for that kind of stuff too. And it's like if this is not the A1 Mark II, then what is? You know, like what? Like where do they go up?
Isn't that a good question? Just hold on to your britches, Daniel. It's coming.
Apparently. But maybe not. Who knows?
Who knows?
Could be years away.
Will we get an A1 Mark II before the A1 original gets focus breathing compensation?
Well, actually, they announced some interesting stuff about that. Did you see that?
No, I didn't.
They announced that the A1 and the A7S III are both getting firmware updates for that feature.
Oh my god!
So it's finally happening.
Oh, people can stop complaining about it.
Yep.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Okay. Every single blog post and YouTube video that I have consumed regarding this A9 Mark III has had to explain to me what a global sensor is.
Nobody knows, Lucas, because this is the first one. It's the first global sensor thing in a mirrorless camera. It's the first
mirrorless full-frame global shutter camera. And I have very distinct memories of us talking about it on this podcast and being corrected about like whether or not you can swap a shutter out on a camera. And then we had to talk about that specific like red module.
About that.
It's just a whole thing.
It was the whole thing.
Oh, geez. Do we have to go into it, Daniel?
Why don't we just say a global sensor reads the entire sensor at once? How about that? How about we just stop there?
Fine, good. I complained about it more than we spent time on it.
Yep.
Okay, now that we all know what a global shutter is,
yes,
which I'm going to just use interchangeably with a global sensor.
Yeah.
Why is that important? What's cool here? What is this doing?
Well, I mean, it seems like what they're saying is that basically you can take pictures really fast, right? So like all the frame rates for video stuff are really high.
You can take pictures so freaking fast.
Yeah. Like the burst rate for photos is incredible on this camera.
The Z9 and the Z8 don't have a mechanical shutter. They're still rolling shutter cameras, but those stacked sensors can read out crazy fast, like so fast. A global sensor reads out instantaneously, all at once. And Nikon, we don't have to have a mechanical shutter because our sensor reads out so fast. Like this A9 Mark III just puts that to complete shame.
Yeah.
If you're looking at other stack sensor cameras, the Z9 can do a 1/32,000th per second shutter speed. The XH2S does a paltry 8,000, 1/8,000. The A9 III is 1/80,000. 80,000th of a second.
That's so fast.
It's absolutely insane. And because it's reading everything at once, there's no more need for like trying to coordinate binning or alignment with lighting and that sort of thing, or having, I said binning, but I mean like the lining within, like if you take a picture under LED lighting and with how it reads out, you'll get like streaking or banding.
Yeah.
None of that.
Yeah, that just doesn't happen.
And so because the fact that it can read out completely, you can now sync with flashes at any shutter speed, which is insane. It doesn't have to be like a derivative of 60 hertz or 50 hertz, depending upon like your electricity. It's just like whatever. You want to shoot a flash at 1/40,000th of a second? Go for it. That's something you could never do before.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, it's a pretty stinking big deal.
It's interesting because when we've talked about global shutter stuff, it's basically always been in the context of video because we're used to seeing it on like cinema cameras and stuff.
Exactly.
And it's interesting that this is showing the advantages of it for photos too.
Right, because the A9 III is a photo camera. It's not a video camera. It can do video. It has pretty impressive video specs too. It does. It can do oversampled 6K. 6K? Yeah, it can do oversampled 6K. It can do oversampled 4K down from 6K.
Yeah, because the sensor itself is 6K. It's a 24 megapixel sensor.
Right, and it can do that up to 60 frames per second. That's full frame oversampled 4K 60.
Yep.
That's nuts.
It can also do 4K 120 without a crop, and it's the first Sony camera to be able to do that.
That's super impressive.
Yeah, it is.
Like, this thing reads out so stinking fast. One of the biggest advantages of shooting on a smaller sensor like Micro Four Thirds is you get these fast read speeds. And you have like Panasonic coming out with the G9 Mark II. And, here's 80 frames per second that you can shoot with photo. And it's like, wow, that's amazing. There's no way you can do that with full frame. This is why you would shoot Micro Four Thirds.
Aw.
And now here's this A9 Mark III, which albeit costs twice as much.
More. This is a $6,000 camera.
Yeah, 2,500. Yeah, 2,500 versus 6,000. You can shoot 120 frames per second, full frame raw photos.
It can only do it for like a second and a half, but it can do it.
It sure can. I like that they added a C5 button, a fifth custom button.
Mm-hmm.
And it by default it's set as like a turbo mode. And so if you set your burst rate to 24 frames per second, you can then hold down your C5 button and it'll like switch it over to 120. So you can just be like shooting a lame 24 frames per second. Oh man, I need all of the frames now. Hold down your turbo button. Boom.
You can see though how that'd be perfect for sports and wildlife type stuff.
Yeah, I mean that's exactly who this is geared towards.
Yeah.
And the other crazy thing about it is because it reads so fast, you're not taking any hit on autofocus. Even if you're shooting 120 frames per second raw photos, you're getting autofocus on every frame.
Yeah, that's impressive. And I mean, it does show you too that the processing power in this camera is pretty incredible. The fact that you can save that many photos and do autofocus and all that. I mean, they put some impressive capability in there.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. This is everything that we've ever wanted out of a fast reading sensor. This is the holy grail of that. Everything's this reads faster. Now we're doing stack sensors. We have faster shutter speeds. I mean, you're trying to get to instantaneous. There isn't a faster option. Like this is it.
Mm-hmm.
Like Sony's made it. Done.
Well, and they've got the same pre-shot thing that I think Nikon might have had that feature too, or basically like it's similar to like a phone camera where it's constantly taking pictures.
Yeah.
And then when you press the button, it saves it. So like it's instantaneous, but it can basically be like you can take the picture before you take the picture.
Yep. A lot of cameras do that. Your camera does this. The A9 does it. The R3. A lot of cameras do it.
Yeah, but they're not doing it at that speed.
No, they're not. This just takes it absolutely to the next level where you can just, if you're holding the shutter halfway, it's just continuously buffering at 120 frames per second until you hit the shutter. And it has some interesting features that I'm curious to see actual reviews of. Like, for instance, if you're holding on the shutter and you're getting all these photos, you can shoot it and then play it back like a video and then just pick your frame.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, that way you're not having to go through 120 photos.
Yeah.
And they know that you're trying to get that decisive moment.
Yeah, I bet they said that in their marketing a few times, didn't they?
And so you pick the picture and you're done. And you don't have to cull through 120 photos. And so they're really thinking about how people use it. And that feels like a feature that's lifted straight off of a phone.
Yeah, it really does.
I saw when I watched the Sony release video thing, they noted that you could do composite RAWs off of this sensor.
What's that mean? What's a composite RAW?
No one else has mentioned anything about it, so I've been a little trepidatious of thinking, did I hear this wrong? But it sounded to me as if they're doing essentially what a phone does. Take 10 pictures, take 5 pictures, composite it into one picture.
No, like at different ISOs or something different? Or do you mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, not the different ISOs. I mean, you know how your phone, you take a picture, it takes 5 pictures, and it combines it into one picture?
Yeah.
That.
Okay.
But it's doing it in RAW in order to reduce noise. And so you can shoot these composite RAW files that are multiple raw images built into one raw image that then has a lot lower noise because they've taken a lot of different pictures in order to kind of bring that down.
Interesting.
It does make me wonder if they're adding that feature now because of noise.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the big question here, right? Because that's normally the downside to global sensor is that the dynamic range usually isn't as good. And you have to imagine if they're pushing the limits on this stuff, there's got to be some kind of compromise. And like you said earlier, it seems like dynamic range and noise would be the two things that you would start hitting if you're really pushing the limits on this stuff.
And you can start seeing it with some of the information that's coming out about the camera. So the base ISO is 250.
Interesting.
That's pretty high for a full frame sensor.
Yeah.
And then it reads out to, I think it's 25-600, and then you can extend it to 52-100.
It's not a very big range.
Yeah, so it's one stop less than the A7R5. So maybe slightly less range on the ISO. I'm expecting that it probably is going to be a little noisier at those higher ISOs comparatively to your other Sony cameras.
I would bet so too.
And it's not a dual gain sensor either. So it's not going to clean up whenever you get to 3200 ISO. It's just going to get worse. So it's probably those are going to be the compromises that we see.
Yeah. So there are some trade-offs compared to, like a more traditional setup.
I am curious to see where the dynamic range lands whenever everyone does their testing. Sony seemed to imply that the dynamic range wasn't going to take too much of a hit, that you would still get somewhere in the 12 to 14, 16 stop range, 14 stop. There was an announcement like 2 years ago where Sony was talking about stack sensors, and I think this is a stack sensor, and the layers and like how they're creating the photodiodes and how many layers are actually in that stack on the chip. And there was this like 2-layer thing versus 3-layer, and most stack sensors are 3 layers now, but they had pioneered this 2-layer option. And one of the advantages of which is that you could get lower noise off of the 2-layer. And it seems like people are saying that this is the 2-layer sensor. And I can throw a link into what that article was, but
so maybe they've tried to compensate some for some of those issues.
Yeah, so I'm expecting that this is probably truly is a newer technology that we haven't seen in other cameras.
Interesting.
And they probably are getting a more appropriate level of noise and dynamic range out of it. But I'm going to expect that it's not going to be as competitive as something like an A7 R5 when it comes to those two things.
So I think that brings up a good question. Like, let's say the DR and the noise are not quite as good as like an A7 R5, A7 IV, the cameras like that. Do you think that trade-off's worth it?
Yes, absolutely. If you're shooting action or sports, or you need something where you need that instantaneous readout, totally worth the trade-off. I think that where it's going to get weird is like you're shooting at 2.8 or 1.4, and you don't want to set your ISO above 3200 because maybe the noise is bad up there. We don't know. I'm just assuming that above 3200 is going to be where you don't want to shoot. You have a pretty limited ISO range, and so even if you're shooting at 1.4, how fast are you going to be able to get that shutter? Super cool that you can shoot at 1/80,000th of a second.
Yeah.
But realistically, within the noise profile of that sensor, are you going to ever shoot that fast?
Yeah. And I mean, I think that this is pretty clearly not a good camera for like event stuff. Like if you're shooting a wedding or something.
I don't know, man.
Like assuming it has these trade-offs that we're assuming it has.
Sure.
If the noise is worse, then like, I don't know, maybe not the right choice for that.
Yeah, I would say that most indoor stuff that we've shot on APS-C, if I'm shooting at 2.8, I will be at 3200 ISO, maybe 6400 ISO. And those are pretty dark environments. And so I would think for a wedding, if you're shooting full frame, it would not be unreasonable for it to be at f2.8 or f4 and then around maybe 1600 ISO if you're pushing it.
Maybe you're right.
And a lot of photographers will use flashes, and now you can set that flash to any shutter speed. So
that is true.
I think that this is going to be pretty appealing just because you have that buffer of 120 frames per second, and you have the flash sync, and it's just so fast that those are probably going to be worthy trade-offs in order to be able to get images you couldn't have otherwise got, even if they're slightly noisier. And maybe the composite RAW thing helps.
Sure.
Maybe those stinking, AI noise reduction
will
stuff.
Save us all.
Yeah,
yes.
Sure. In Lightroom, it'll make it all better. Who knows?
Yep. What about for video?
So we talked about it a little bit. They're saying like 422 10-bit, like S-Log 3, and then they announced the the frame rate thing.
And it can do 16-bit RAW external.
Okay.
Over HDMI.
I did not see that. So it's just basically competitive with what their other stuff is. They're clearly not pushing the video specs on this as far as here's one of the reasons you're going to get this camera.
Well, I mean, the main thing they did push that was different was like the full sensor readout, oversampled 4K, as well as the no crop 4K 120. Those are things that haven't happened before. But
this is pretty cool and really appealing, and I think that for people who are shooting in the Sony world and they need something that is going to have no rolling shutter, here's finally a fantastic option that's going to be able to fit right into their workflow.
And Sony cameras really have not traditionally been good at rolling shutter. Even, I mean, I mean, so personally, I feel like rolling shutter is not that big of a deal for the way most people shoot video. But I'm also like, we're on XH2S with a stack sensor, and like the rolling shutter isn't that bad.
Oh, it's
Sony
incredible.
rolling shutter is pretty bad. And so, like, if you're a Sony shooter, this is a pretty big step forward in that regard.
It definitely is. I do think that some of their more cinema-oriented cameras have a lot more things that you would want for video. And if you don't need the instantaneous shutter capture, then someone is probably still going to gravitate towards an FX3 or an FX30.
Maybe
for this category, let's say FX3.
At this price point,
FX6?
even the FX6.
Yeah. Sure. Because those are going to have more of the features in them. They're going to have the dual gain ISO. They're going to have better low light performance. They're going to have better noise performance. They're going to have better dynamic range. And just in general will be better for video unless the thing you need video for is moving really fast.
Yeah.
I think this is going to pair really well with those options.
Yeah. I think so too.
So looking at their competitors, I mean, Nikon has their Z9 stuff. And before this came out, if you're looking for a sports or wildlife camera, something that's got really good zooms and really fast readouts, like you're looking at Nikon, right?
Yeah.
The Z9 with its stacked 40 megapixel sensor, 40 something megapixel sensor, fantastic. I feel like there's still room for that here in that it is 40 megapixels.
Well, and the lens ecosystem. I mean, one thing Nikon has going for them is they've got a lot of lenses and a lot of zooms.
Yeah. Sony also has a lot of lenses and a lot of zooms. They just released a 300 millimeter 2.8 prime with this thing.
I saw that.
It's crazy.
Yeah. And it's like small too. It's not that heavy.
It's like super light. It's the lightest in its class.
Yep.
Costs the same as the camera. So I think that the Z9 is the closest competitor to this for like sports, wildlife, action, that sort of thing. And that you may still favor the Nikon for the lenses and for the megapixels, resolution. The other big competitor to this thing is the R3. It was a big deal for Canon. It was like, here's our first stack sensor that we've ever made. But that one's only 24 megapixels. It has a worse EVF. It has worse shutter speed, worse burst rates. There's nothing better about the Canon R3 than the A9 Mark III. Yeah.
It's got those Canon colors.
Dude, it destroys the R3 in like every single
category. Canon colors.
No. Oh boy, it just dances circles around it. It's gonna be better for autofocus. Like you can match colors to any camera at this point with those raw files. Like shooting speed, it's not a higher megapixel sensor. There's nothing that R3 does better than the A9
This is what we
Mark
like
III.
to see. We like to see that level of competition because somebody's got to keep pushing these companies to make better and better stuff. And right now it's Sony.
Yeah,
Nikon and Canon, are pretty threatened by this, and they should be.
They absolutely should be for their high end sport wildlife photo market. Whew. Yeah.
I think it's a pretty exciting release.
Yeah, me too. It's just something that we haven't. I feel like I said it before. I feel like we haven't seen something like this from Sony in a while.
Yeah,
and just this new sensor tech is absolutely unbelievable.
Yeah, it is.
I am curious to see where they go from here. With a global sensor, I thought whenever we saw stacked sensors start rolling out, that we would eventually start seeing them come down the line and see them in more cameras. And this was going to be the new big thing, that we were still a ways away from global shutter sensors, and we were just going to be on stacked systems for a little while. And it just hasn't happened. You have the Z8.
There's still not very many of them.
No, there's XH2S, Z8, Z9, R3, A1. That's basically it. I think the OM1 is stacked. And yeah, there's not that many. There's just a handful, and most of those, like the Z9 came out 2 years ago, the A1 came out 2 or 3 years ago, and we're just not seeing things. They didn't release the A7R5 as a stack sensor. It just hasn't become ubiquitous like I thought it was going to, and now Sony's just moving on to the next thing.
Yep.
It
makes me understand why they didn't put it in the A7R5, because they probably just didn't care to develop it if they knew they were working on this global sensor thing.
Yeah, it feels like certain TV technology, like OLED or QDOT, where we're probably going to end up jumping over those and move straight to like micro LED or nano, whatever we're going to call it, like the just all individual LEDs for the pixels, and OLED is just never going to become everything that it could be and was like the promised son of the future or whatever. It feels like stack sensors may end up in that world. Like the global sensor is still stacked. Like it's still a viable technology, but
I guess you mean a rolling shutter stacked sensor.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It seemed like that was like the promise of the future.
Yeah.
And I do wonder if, the A7S IV that will eventually come out in, probably like 2027 or something silly. When did that other one? Yeah, that other one came out 3 years ago.
Yeah, it's getting pretty old.
And the A7S II was like 4 years or 5 years. It was pretty long before that thing released.
Yeah, the A7 III was long awaited. Or sorry, A7S III was long awaited.
And so I would expect that we're going to see an A7 V, and then it's going to be like 2 years, and then we're going to see an A7S4.
Yeah.
So we're probably still, 3 years at least away from an A7S4.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to be curious to see like whether Sony's future cameras use this technology, or if it's still like maybe it's still just way too expensive and has compromises, and so maybe it's just on their really high end stuff for a few more years.
Yeah, that's what kind of where I'm getting is this a test bed and they're going to see how it goes, or are we going to see the next A7S camera have a global sensor, maybe with dual gain? Because that would be pretty impressive. That would be very competitive with certain cinema cameras. Yeah. And I know that Arri doesn't do a global sensor, and that's because you're losing on the dynamic range, and that's the whole deal with them. Is we have the most dynamic range on these cameras, and like look at this image quality and all this sort of thing. And I feel like maybe they'd have too much compromise for it. But I'm wondering if Sony's new approach to their sensor technology is going to kind of absolve us of some of the issues with global sensors.
Right, that 2-layer thing. And all
yeah.
that.
It's just real interesting where it's going.
What I'm curious to see is whether this is the sensor that would be in the S1H Mark II.
No, I feel like it can't be. I still think the S1H Mark II is going to shoot 8K.
Yeah, and this is not an 8K sensor.
No,
high
it's
enough
not.
Resolution.
Yeah, so there is still room for cameras like the A7R5 and the Z9 and the A1 and the R5 because they're 40, 60 megapixels.
Yeah.
And sometimes you just need that resolution. I may be wrong. Maybe Sony's going to sell Panasonic this stacked sensor for their S1. I mean, the S1H is a 24 megapixel sensor. So, it wouldn't be out of question for them to release that as a 6K camera.
And Panasonic did say that they don't think that consumers want 8K right now.
That's true. They did say that.
But it's like I sort of want it to have it, and then I sort of don't, because I don't want the S1H Mark II to cost $6,000.
I mean, the other one costs $4,000.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the whole deal, Daniel, is
big jump up.
They've been waiting on Sony to release this camera so that then they can release the S1H Mark II next year with the global sensor.
That's kind of what I'm wondering, but I don't know. It's just obviously just a wild theory.
Canon really needs to release the R1.
Yeah, and I hope for their sake that it's competitive with this camera at least.
Oh boy, can you imagine how embarrassing it would be if Sony just be like maybe the person at Canon they're in their boardrooms planning or whatever. Sony's not going to come out with a global sensor for another 2 years. It's not going to happen. We have this new fancy pants sensor for our R1, and it's going to be the best thing ever. At least way better than anything that anyone has right now. There's no way anyone's going to beat us to this. And Sony's still way far off on the global sensor, and we got this covered. And they're getting ready to announce it. I don't know when it's going to come out, but they're getting ready to announce it. And now Sony has this press conference. It's like, oh, jeez.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Yep.
Ugh. Well, we're just going to see the R1 show up on Canon's website. They're not even going to announce it. It's a really subtle press release on Friday at 5 o'clock. Available for pre-order.
Oh, man. Poor Canon.
Oh, boy. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Canon's got something else up its sleeves. They're the only sensor manufacturer out there, Daniel.
I kind of feel like poor Nikon, because I feel like what Nikon really had going for it was that Z9 with the fast, no mechanical shutter and fast speed. And Nikon doesn't feel like it has quite as much brand cachet as Canon does these days. And I feel like one of their big selling points was they were so ahead on specs, and this kind of beats that out.
Yeah, it really does. The Z9 didn't come out too far after the A1, and they have very similar sensors.
Mm-hmm.
And it does seem like Sony would save the best for themselves.
Sure.
But I can see a world where some Z camera has this sensor. I can't see it as a successor to the Z9, like a Z9 Mark II, because it's too low megapixel. There's no way it's a Z6, because we've already agreed that the Z6 Mark III is just the Nikon FC, but rebodied.
Well, and plus, I mean, they're not going to put this in a low-tier camera.
ZF. Did I get the name of that
right?
Yeah,
ZFC. Yeah.
ZF
and
ZFC.
ZFC.
Yeah,
the C is the APS-C one.
Right. Okay. It can't be an A7 or A7. Geez, it can't be a Z7 because that's a 40 megapixel sensor.
Yep.
Like they're going to drop that one down. They've already used Z8.
It would
Z5's
have to be a new version of the Z9. It's the only thing that makes sense with their naming scheme.
They don't have a Z4. That would be too low.
Z1.
Z10. They don't have a Z1 either. That would be confusing. Z1 or Z9 too.
Yep.
I don't know. I guess we'll see.
Yeah, I guess we will.
Maybe there's a 40 megapixel version of the sensor sitting around. Just put two of them on top of each other. Go like really vertical with it.
Yeah. Like vertical anamorphic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What couldn't they just like? I know it'd be crazy expensive, but couldn't you just take 4 of these things and like put them together? Is it just a processing power problem? Couldn't you parallelize it? Couldn't you do 4 sensors and 4 processors and have a global 65 millimeter medium format and sensor? What's stopping them, Daniel?
All of the things you just said. Cost, processing power.
I want you to think about this.
You're going to buy $24,000 worth of camera sensors?
I just assumed they'd add more, and then it's going to be a $30,000 camera. Yeah. Imagine this $30,000 camera, Daniel, that has this quad 35 millimeters. We're talking 70 millimeter across. Think about how big those lenses are. Think about that image circle for a while.
Too much.
I want you to look at your forearm. Bigger. Now look at your quad. Bigger.
I don't know whether I should be insulted or not. Kind of a little insulted.
Yeah, okay. All right, other things about this camera. We've talked about it so much, but it seems like they brought all the cool stuff from the A7R5.
Yep.
It has the new IBIS. It has that 9 point whatever million dot EVF. It's got the really cool flippy screen deal where it can be like photo mode or video mode.
I think it has all the AI stuff, doesn't it?
It's got all the AI stuff. It's got all the autofocus stuff. It's just everything that we got out of the A7R5 that made that camera super, super cool. You got in the A9 III.
Yeah. It's nice you don't give anything up considering you're paying so much more for it.
I feel like a lot of people bought the A7R5 for video stuff as, here's a good hybrid camera. And I think the A9 III now makes more sense as the hybrid camera. And the A7R5 is more of your high resolution stills now.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're probably right, but the cost is so high. I mean, because the A7R5 is probably like in the $4,000 range.
I guess so, yeah.
And I mean, this is $6,000 is substantially more than that.
I feel like once you get over $4,500 for a camera, the price just doesn't matter anymore.
Yeah, like the kind of people that are buying it are just
round up. It's a half an hour mount lens.
It's all these YouTubers with more money than sense, man. I've already seen people YouTubers talking about how great this camera is and how they want one. It's like they don't need a global sensor camera, but
I mean, I kind of want one.
Yeah, I'm sure you do.
Yep, I'm looking at these 2 things that I dropped in here, and I think we talked about both of them already. Do we need to talk about this 300 millimeter anymore?
I think we covered that. I feel good about that one.
Okay, that's it. That's everything.
Yep.
Right? Here's one more note here. I wrote down Murder Town for stacked. I don't know what that means.
I think that's what you were saying earlier about how, we just kind of passed over rolling shutter stacked sensors.
We sure did. I'm still just really confused by this A1, A7, A9 situation.
Yeah. It doesn't make much sense to me either, but I think they just got trapped in their model numbers. I think they've done this every other number thing. They have like A7, A9, but then like they don't want to go to double digits because that communicates a lower tier. And so where do you go from 9?
There's literally every number between 7 and 1.
Well, what I mean is like they like, are you confused about why there's an A1?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe they're just like, this one's the best, so it's the one. But
Do you think that's a one-off? Do you think there's never going to be another A1?
it would fit, right? Just one A1.
Yeah. No,
But
yeah,
it
that
could
makes
also
sense.
be like, maybe because Canon does that with their numbers, maybe they wanted to be like, this is our like top tier thing. But I still just don't get why this is not an A1 Mark II. That's strange.
What if you're right? What if after the A7-7, that's it? They're done. There's only one A1.
Yep.
There's 7 A7s. And there'll be 9 A9s.
And then they'll be finished.
Yeah. And that'll be it.
Yeah. But fortunately, we have a lot more A6700s to come.
You're very true.
They can just build on that forever.
Yeah, so we got 3 years between release dates. So there's still 9 more years before we're done with the A7 series, and then after that, it's just all APS-C.
Yeah. for the rest of eternity until the sun burns out, there will be A6700s.
Yep. A6701, A6702. Anyways, Canon released a new lens.
Yeah. Canon did something good.
Yep. This is pretty cool, Daniel. Did you see this thing?
I did see this thing. I'm going to put this on the notes, Lucas. I did see that they announced it. It's a 24-105 f2.8, and I think it's the first f2.8 lens in that focal length.
Yes, but yeah, for full frame, it is absolutely the first one in that focal length. They just keep doing this, Daniel. Just think back like 3 episodes ago.
I can't remember back that far.
I was trying to emphasize to you how impressive it was that Canon made a full frame 10mm zoom lens.
Well, I think this one's more impressive because this is actually a useful focal range. I don't care about 10mm. I don't need 10mm.
They just keep doing it.
Yeah.
We're wondering, why is anyone going to buy an R3 when the A9 Mark III exists? And the answer is because Canon keeps making lenses that no one else is making.
Well, I appreciate it because I feel like RF mount has been sorely lacking for lenses, partially because Canon won't open it up. And I appreciate that they're actually making new things that give you new capabilities rather than just like a Mark II of a lens that gives you, infinitesimally better image quality, like some tiny little step forward. Like having a better aperture is a meaningful improvement, and that's cool to see.
Do you know how much this thing weighs, Daniel?
I know it's heavy, but I don't remember how much it weighs.
Do you think it weighs more or less than a Noct?
I think it weighs less than a Noct, but not by as much as we would like.
I am struggling to find the weight. 40? There's no way it's 46. Oh, that's ounces. 1,330 grams. That's what I'm talking about.
That's not that heavy.
It weighs basically as much as like a 70 to 200 2.8.
Yeah.
And it's almost the same size too.
Yeah. It actually weighs a little bit less than that 300mm f2.8 from Sony, the one that just came out.
That makes that 300mm sound really impressive now.
Yeah. Yeah.
They put the glass like farther back in that thing so that it's more balanced.
Interesting.
It's very interesting. Huh. Anyway, 24-105 f2.8, dude.
Yeah.
Super cool. Pretty well breathed. Like they basically built this as a hybrid lens. So you can like shoot it for photo, but also it's really good for video. They made it so that it has gears on the aperture and the focus ring. And then you can buy this module that you slap onto the side of it, and then it will work with your camera's built-in buttons in order to, pull focus or do electronic zoom. Like you can do, push the button and it will zoom in and zoom out like a power zoom.
Yeah, which is really cool because there have been lenses you could buy that are power zoom lenses. Like I know Sony makes some, and even Fuji has one now. But this is kind of a neat idea where it's like, it's not power zoom out of the box, but you can add on this thing if you want that. Pretty neat.
It is pretty cool. They have a declicked aperture on this thing, which I've heard is a little annoying in that you can't toggle it. You can't choose to be declicked or not declicked, like click or not. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I get what you're saying, but what do you mean by you can't choose? It's just it's always declicked?
Yes, it's always declicked. So you can't like toggle that on and off.
Yeah,
but
maybe that's a little annoying, but I'd get over that. I think it's fine.
It's got that front control ring. This thing has so many features, Daniel.
Yeah.
It's got so many rings on it. It's got buttons. You can set like 2 custom buttons.
It's
crazy.
It's a cool lens, no doubt.
2 lens custom buttons.
I mean, the 24-105 is a super useful focal length, and having that in 2.8 is great. I think it's pretty expensive though, right?
Oh, it's very expensive.
Yeah, a couple $1,000, $3,000 maybe.
Yeah, it's around that $3,000 price point.
Yeah.
This is the do everything lens.
Mm-hmm.
You could, if you switch back to Canon, you just buy this lens.
Yep.
You don't need
Just
anything
that
else.
one lens.
You just need this one.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, that's not, like if you were a Canon shooter, I could totally imagine people just needing this one lens.
It would cover most things. I think this is a good lens for definitely for wedding stuff, where you're always having to switch between your 24-70 and your 70-200, and you don't get quite the range of the 70-200, but 105 gets you pretty far.
Yep. It could be good for like a tripod use case if you have like a fixed camera somewhere,
Sure.
like a broadcast situation or something. It's a useful lens for sure.
I think that they don't have a ton of video options in RF. They did finally release all those Cine Primes, which are really nice and ginormous and expensive. But if you're looking for like a hybrid lens for like your R5C or whatever, maybe not that one, but that you can shoot video with, but also you're going to use it as a hybrid to then shoot photos. This feels like kind of the perfect lens for that application.
Yeah, I agree. Pretty neat.
Good
job, Canon.
I confirmed $3,000.
Yeah. So pricey, but honestly, like I kind of expected it to be more expensive than that because a lot of those premium RF lenses are really high. Like the 70-200's $2,300 or $2,400.
Yeah,
so,
I would have not been surprised to see this at like $3,500, but
but don't tell Canon that. It's too expensive, Canon. You need to make it cheaper.
there you go. Oh man. You put on the show notes here about the Apple event being shot on iPhone.
Yes, I did.
And I wrote next to it, boo. I'm so sick of talking about the iPhone and the video features. All they did was add log and remove the stuff that makes it bad.
Okay, so first off, when you said boo, I thought it's because that event was on Halloween.
It was the day before Halloween.
It was the night before Halloween.
This should have been spookier, honestly.
Yes, yeah. I mean, you're right, but I don't know. I just thought it was neat. Everybody was talking about it. Felt like it was worth mentioning that they did that.
It's just the hot new thing, Daniel, to talk about how good the video is out of the iPhone.
But that's not really what the story is around this. I mean, that's what some people think the story is. But have you seen all the drama on the internet about it? Because there's some people that are saying, "Oh, Apple said it was shot on the iPhone, but they're leaving out all the expensive lights and gimbals and stuff, and it's like fake advertising." There's people saying that.
Oh yeah, they feel deceived because they basically took their Arri 65 setup with all of the crew and all of the gear and all of the lighting, and then just swapped in an iPhone 15 Pro Max.
Yes. Yeah, there's people that feel that way, and then there's people that are like, "Look what you can do with just an iPhone." And so, the truth is somewhere in the middle.
It is. The iPhone 15, when you're shooting in Apple Log, legitimately good footage. We shot an interview. We set up the iPhone to shoot with it, and I have now graded the footage, and we didn't do a good job. We just kind of set it up really quickly, and it was basically overexposed by 2 stops.
Yeah.
I was able to bring it down 2 stops, match the footage. It's a little clippy on the highlights, and where the highlight hits the person's face, I basically have some unrecoverable parts, and it's really hard to kind of stretch that out. But even with adjusting the curves and fixing the grade and color matching to my other footage, I'm not getting any banding. The footage is not falling apart. It's good codec. It holds up. I can match it, and it just works.
Yeah.
But I don't know how much of that is Apple doing something interesting, or did they literally just apply log? I don't want to make it sound simple.
Yeah.
But I don't get it. Why is it used to be, it's all these different features. You're shooting HDR video, and here you got your Pixel or your Samsung, and it can take all this really cool video stuff. And what we all wanted this whole time was don't do anything weird to the footage. Don't do any weird tone mapping. Just get me a flat profile that has a good codec.
Yep.
And it's just going to work. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, why? One, on Android, you can have all these different custom apps. How come it took until this point for anyone to realize that, oh, wow, now we're using Apple iPhones for like shooting movies, and now they're like really, really good all of a sudden. And it's like anyone could have done this if they just, stuck log and a good codec into the camera.
Yeah. I don't know.
Am I misunderstanding that?
Well, I think that, we've known for a long time that the reason phones do all those tricks is basically to make up for the physics of not having good optics.
Sure.
And so I think that maybe it just wasn't realistic to take all that stuff out until we hit some certain level of, like sensor technology and micro optic type stuff. Because clearly, if you're going to take all that stuff out, you have to have a good enough like raw image to make it work. And even this probably is not like literally a raw image. I'm sure they're still doing a lot of image processing the same way any camera does. They just took out the parts that people don't like. So I think we did have to get to a certain point of technology before this was possible. And so that's why we haven't had this for years and years. But I mean, you do have a good point. Like, there's nothing stopping Google or Samsung or whoever else from offering these same features. They just haven't done it. And it seems like Apple was the first one to do it. And I think they deserve some credit for that, for seeing what people wanted or predicting what people wanted and giving them that, because the other companies seem like they haven't really done that. And I'm sure they will now, like now that Apple's done it. I'm sure we're going to see Samsung and Google release similar things, or at least Samsung. Google will probably get bored and, cancel the Pixel or something. But I mean, we'll probably see them do it. But I don't know. I mean, I think it's cool. I think it's super cool that my phone can take video that we can match with an XH2S. That's not something we could do last year.
No.
And I think Apple deserves some credit just for pioneering, putting those features in a phone, advertising it like in a keynote, and like legitimatizing that as a tool.
I think it's phenomenal. I think it's fantastic. I love the record to ProRes, record to an external SSD, add the F-Log support, all this sort of thing. And it's just great to finally have that in the camera that I have with me, although not me, but that a person could have with them all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not fancy like you with my iPhone 15.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't, it's like we finally got to that point, but I don't understand why we couldn't have done it earlier.
Well, nobody did. Like,
I get like it's all fine. I find it a little frustrating because I'm like, this is all we've been asking for. Is cool, you shoot, like, iPhone's shot good video for years. I have a 12 Pro Max. It shoots good video.
Yeah. It
doesn't shoot log. It does weird tone mapping. Let me just like turn off the HDR and get a 10-bit image. Like, I feel like the hardware and the capabilities there, and it's like they finally realized, oh, this is what we need to do in order to provide an image that people will actually be able to use.
Right.
And then once they did it, now it's like, I shot this on an iPhone and it's better than your FX30 and all this crazy stuff.
Yeah. I will say that USB-C thing, which is new for the new iPhones, I think is a pretty big part of what makes this realistic, because when we shot that interview, we did shoot it to an SSD, and that definitely made it easier than trying to download that footage from the phone over USB 2, because like Lightning to USB was always limited to USB 2.0 speed.
Oh, jeez, it's so slow.
That would be terrible. So I do feel like the USB-C stuff was an enabling technology. And so maybe that's why Apple didn't do it previously. But I don't know. I don't know why they didn't have it before. I'm glad they have it now. And, we'll probably see this on Android soon.
I thought that the Apple event looked really good. And I've looked at the footage that you've shot, and I've done some grading and editing with it. And I still feel like the level of detail of the iPhone sensor is not quite as good as what I'm getting out of my Fuji camera.
Yeah.
And it's just sensor size and just purely literally the level of detail where you zoom in and how much like bumps and movement and stuff on the skin, and just the way that things look and how not smooth things look.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all.
But also like the way that most people watch footage, like I can't see, even like when I'm in the editor and it's a small window, I can't see it.
And most people are going to watch stuff on their phone.
Watch it back on your phone, you can't see it. Even like you play it on a projector sitting far away, you can't see it. And it's like, does it really matter?
Yeah.
And I think the answer is no. Like, you can use your iPhone for, especially with like the log and all the things, you can use it for anything you want. And like, no one's going to notice and no one's going to care. And it's just going to look really good. It's not going to look as good as like your A9 Mark III, but
Yeah.
it holds its own.
Yeah, pretty cool.
We talked about it. Are you happy?
Yeah, I'm happy.
I'm not happy. No more. We said no more phone stuff. And here we are, still talking about the iPhone and stupid log profiles. And it's like perfectly fine.
That's it for the show today. Thanks for joining us. And if you liked it, tell a friend so they can check it out too. You can find out more about the show at www.cameragearpodcast.com. And you can find us on Twitter at CameraGearPod. We'll be back with more next week.